about a friend of mine who lives in the country, in rural Vermont, and he has since given up on teaching me anything about country life, but when we first became friends, he thought he would teach me things like fly fishing and all that stuff. And this is one little lesson he tried to teach me about living in the country that I had a hard time processing. And the poem is just called "The Country." I wondered about you when you told me never to leave a box of wooden strike-anywhere matches just lying around the house because the mice might get into them and start a fire. But your face was absolutely straight when you twisted the lid down on the round tin where the matches, you said, are always stowed. Who could sleep that night? Who could whisk away the thought of the one unlikely mouse padding along a cold water pipe behind the floral wallpaper, gripping a single wooden match between the needles of his teeth? Who could not see him rounding a corner, the blue tip scratching against a rough-hewn beam, the sudden flare, and the creature, for one bright, shining moment, suddenly thrust ahead of his time, now a fire starter, now a torchbearer in a forgotten ritual, little brown druid illuminating some ancient night? And who could fail to notice, lit up in the blazing insulation, the tiny looks of wonderment on the faces of his fellow mice? One-time inhabitants of what once was your house in the country. Thanks very much. I read a couple of poems that are not particularly new, but I enjoy reading them. One is, I think, easy just to step on board the poem because it's called Forgetfulness, and it's sort of just study in that human frailty, that moment where you find your mind seems to be a kind of unfurnished apartment in which no one is living. I came across an admission on the part of Nicholson Baker recently in an article. He said that he had read Anna Karenina, how many 20 or 30 or 40 hours worth of reading, and looking back on Anna Karenina, he remembered only a picnic basket. That was all he remembered from the entire drama. And my first reaction was one of simpatico. I thought, another person whose memory is at least as bad as mine. And then I drew up quickly and thought, what picnic basket? At least he had something, But I wasn't about to go back and reread Anna Karenina just to discover some picnic basket. So the poem, I mention that because the poem begins by talking about that kind of literary slippage. It's called Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago, you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away, a state flower perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you very much. I don't know why. I think this next poem is a sort of companion poem because if the forgetfulness is about not remembering anything, this poem kind of features a speaker who remembers everything. And I started writing this poem as a reaction to this kind of social media habit we had in the back in the 20th century there, when you have vague memories of that. You remember like hula hoop and World War I and all sorts of other stuff happened. But we always referred to the past in terms of decades, so we would very glibly talk about the 60s, and then there was the 80s, and every decade had a certain personality, and we kind of commodified and sentimentalized the passing of these decades, and we looked to it made it easy to regard the past because we just needed to be nostalgic about it, and then that simplified the condition of the rearview mirror. So that's why the poem is called Nostalgia. Remember the 1340s. We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown, the color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon. And at night we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered back then, not like today. Whereas the summer of 1572 gone. Brocade and sonnet marathons were all the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another on cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor, we were all doing the struggle, while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. We borrowed the jargon of farriers for our slang. These days, language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. People would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what they saw in their journals without speaking. Our collars were high, our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to be alive, or even dead. I am very fond of the period between 1815 and 1821. Europe trembled while we sat still for our portraits. And I would love to return to 1901, if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps, or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month when we picked berries together and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Thanks so much. Well, I'll read a few more since we're all gathered here.